Hello everybody, welcome back. This is Asura at Asura Psych, and today I'm going to be talking about love and attraction theories. I've received quite a few requests to make a video about types and how they come together and how compatible they are and which ones go with which, and that's all fine, but I want to kind of discuss the overarching theories that support love and attraction first, and then discuss how those might support how the types are likely to engage in relationships. So the first major theory is what's known as the Similarity and Attraction theory. This theory suggests that similarities draws people together more than differences do. So a lot of people who are discussing love and relationships will often think between the two phrases, birds of a feather flock together and opposites attract. Social psychology teaches us that birds of a feather flock together is more so true than opposites attract. This does not mean that people who are opposite will not or cannot be in a meaningful relationship together, but that way more often than not, people who are similar end up in long-lasting relationships compared to people who are different. And this is because opposites attract typically becomes differences divide down the road. That is to say, something that is different about another person might initially attract you to that person, but down the road, that difference could become the one thing that bothers you so much about them that you can't get over. It could be the one thing that drives you to be a little frustrated every day. Now let's think about this in terms of Myers-Briggs. If you were an INTP, for say, dating an INTJ, the INTJ might be far more obsessed with keeping their room clean or something of that nature, being to places on time. Now, if a J and a P are together, the thing that they're most likely going to struggle with is when are they going to get somewhere on time? How are things going to be organized and things like that? In the beginning, it might be nice to have someone who's very different from you because they're more relaxed. They can teach you to slow down a little. But overall, if that person is too high on the perceiving scale compared to the person who's on the judging scale, that difference is going to cause daily frustrations. And daily frustrations typically are the thing that break couples apart instead of bringing them together for long-lasting relationships. The next major theory is what's known as matching theory. And matching theory suggests that people seek out people who are within their range of attractiveness and socioeconomic or public status. Now, this is to say that people typically want to date or be with people who are close to them in their level of social status and attractiveness. Think of it like this way. If you perceive yourself to be like a 6 or 7 out of 10 in attractiveness, you are typically going to only search for a partner who is within 1 or 2 numbers of you, someone who's a 7 or 8, maybe even a 9. Typically, people don't even search for people who are below them on attractiveness level. Now, the interesting thing about this is everyone perceives beauty in a slightly different way. So what you perceive as a 7 or 8 could be someone else's 4 or 5. It could be their 10, vice versa. Now, how this applies to socioeconomic and public status is that people typically don't get into relationships with people who are far outside of their wealth or status range. So homeless people aren't going to be in a relationship with very wealthy doctors very often. And that's just how it works. We typically want to be with someone who's going to be somewhat within our status. There are 2 outlying groups to this that statistics show, and that is that old wealthy men tend to marry up the attractiveness scale, while young women tend to marry up the wealth scale. This may sound somewhat sexist, but that is what the statistics have to say about this. Now, how does this relate to Myers-Briggs? It relates to Myers-Briggs because someone who is a certain type might view other certain types in a certain way, and they might have prejudice or opinions about those types, and that's really all the application that matching theory has towards type, because type really doesn't tell us anything about socioeconomic status or attractiveness, other than that certain types might make more money than other certain types, like ESTJs typically have the highest average annual salary. But that doesn't mean you're going to be attracted to an ESTJ. In fact, it's quite the opposite. ESTJs often struggle with relationships because of their overbearing personality. Next, we have what is called Sternbergs' triangular model of love. Now, this theory suggests that there are 3 major components of love: intimacy, passion, and commitment. When these come together in different forms, they create different types of relationships, which combines to make a total of 7 types of relationships. This is what's called romantic love, which is intimacy and passion; liking, intimacy alone; companionate love, which is intimacy and commitment; empty love, which is decision or commitment alone; fatuous love, passion plus commitment, infatuation, which is passion alone, and consummate love, which is intimacy, passion, and commitment. These three major components of love come together to make 7 overarching styles of love, and how people interact through these styles is going to have a long-term effect on their relationship. So, for example, if you are in what's called an empty love, which is just commitment alone, the odds are there's a high chance of divorce in your future, because the decision is typically just from you deciding that this is the best thing you can do. An example of this would be someone who marries because they got pregnant with their partner, but they don't really love that person that they got pregnant with. They're just doing it because they want to raise the child in a good home. But statistics show us that this is most likely going to end up in a divorce, most likely going to end up in a failed relationship. Now, let's take something like empty love plus intimacy, or commitment plus intimacy. This would be called companionate love, which is long-term committed friendship, such as marriage, in which the passion has faded. Now, the problem with this is that the passion has faded. This is two people who have been in a relationship for a long time, but the spark is gone. They don't have that same spark that they had at the beginning of the relationship. Now, if you combined all three major factors, you would have consummate love, intimacy, passion, and commitment, which is a complete love consisting of all the components of love. Now, this particular theory doesn't really apply to MBTI that much, except that certain types are probably going to have certain other connections with certain other types. So, for example, if you're dating someone who is on the far side of the type spectrum for you, you might have a very highly passionate love or infatuation. You might be obsessively loving this person, but the odds of this relationship lasting into a long-term relationship or marriage probably aren't that high, because if you're just infatuated, then you're not really going to love the things about them. You're just going to think you love the things about them until those mirages kind of fall apart before you. The idea is to find someone that you think that you can maintain all three of these aspects with in the long term. And of course, there are going to be times in your life where these things don't come together like you want them to. There's going to be times in a long-term relationship or marriage where one part falls out, one part falls back in. And that's the normal part of love and relationships. Things like that happen. No relationship is perfect. The last thing I want to talk about are the forms of intimacy. And there are quite a few forms of intimacy, and some people can get creative and kind of create their own to put into this theory. But typically there's 4 or 5, depending on which you look at. Now, forms of intimacy are the ways in which people can come together. This is kind of like a different approach to the triangular model of love. And with the forms of intimacy, there are emotional, intellectual, physical, experiential and shared activity, and spiritual. These are the 5 different ways in which people can come together to create a lasting or meaningful relationship. Now, in this theory, some people could come together and have multiple aspects of intimacy that come together to create a great relationship. Or some people can create a long-term lasting relationship with only one form of intimacy. So people who are extremely emotionally invested into each other can form a long-term relationship. People who are only intellectually interested in each other can form a long-term intimate relationship. And that's because their intimacy stems from their intellectual attractiveness towards each other. Now, in this theory, you can also mix and match some of the intimacy. So you could be intellectually and emotionally attracted to someone. Now, on a psychological level, if you're intellectually attracted to someone, you're most likely going to have a natural biological response that causes you to be emotionally attracted to that person. Now, this can also cause differences with things like physical attractiveness, because you might not be physically attracted to someone, but if you are extremely emotionally and intellectually attracted to someone, it might be enough to make you be in a long-term relationship with them, one that might even last your whole life, even if you are not extremely physically attracted to them. Experiential or shared activity intimacy is the kind where people who do things together tend to stay in relationships. For MBTI, think of this in the terms of like ESFPs or ESTPs. People who like to hike and do actual activities together tend to group together and come into relationships, or they attract that way. People who play sports together, things like that. This theory kind of somewhat also applies to friendships as well, because you can also have friendship intimacies with all of these forms of intimacy. Spiritual intimacy is the kind where you think of people coming together through a love for God or some sort of higher being or power or idea, and that can cause them to come together into a long-term relationship. That's really all there is in terms of relationship theories, or at least that's all that I have for this specific video. You'll notice that these theories don't really apply to MBTI that much, and that's because, in my opinion, MBTI is not a great predictor of love. There are types who are going to be more so attracted to each other than others, and that goes back to our kind of similarity theory, where if you date someone who is 1 or 2 letters matched with you, you're probably going to have a little bit better of a time than if you date someone who's all 4 letters opposite to you. But in my opinion, any type can really be with any type. It really comes down to more personal things than how one perceives, judges, or interacts with their immediate environment. I really hope you enjoyed this video. This is Sarah Psych. If you have any suggestions or comments, feel free to comment down below. I would love to hear them. Have a good one.